Hello and welcome to another edition of VU Sports Wired. Cutler Klein here alongside Max Schneider and Drew Sundaram. Thank you so much as always for tuning in. It may be cold and rainy outside, but the takes are hot here in Sports Wired Studios. We are here to talk some hoops and talk some Diamonds. Baseball off to a great start. The Vandy boys currently playing at the time of this show's taping, so we'll get to some pre-Wednesday analysis of this team. But first, we are moving to the hardwood as Vanderbilt last week had perhaps their best week of the season in basketball, taking down the Mississippi State Bulldogs 81-80 at Memorial Gym, then taking down Florida in a huge game in front of prize recruit Romeo Langford 71-68. Guys, we've seen Vanderbilt play in a lot of close games this season, especially at home. They are in pretty much every game they play. This time they were able to actually pull it out instead of collapsing at the end, as we've seen them do time and time again. What made the difference this week and allowed them to win these games?
So when I look at this week, the difference really was the play that they got out of their bench. And a lot of times down the stretch when players have struggled, Bryce Drew's kind of been forced to leave those guys in because he doesn't get that same production when he goes to the bench. You see that level of drop-off. This week the bench was extremely good. Peyton Willis hit 5 threes against Mississippi State. And the biggest part of it was Joe Toye really came into his own this past week. I mean, if you look at the first day of basketball season, on this show you asked me who I thought was going to be the X factor for this team, and I said Joe Toye, and Joe Toye was silent the entire year. He couldn't get anything done. Now Joe Toye's starting to play well, and Vanderbilt's winning games, and you see that they really need that 6'7" wing guy who can defend on one side of the floor and be explosive and stretch the floor on the other side. So when you have that kind of player in Joe Toye and you're able to keep him on the floor because he's been able to do it on offense, you open up your entire game. And you saw it a lot against Mississippi State. He was 3 for 3 from 3 and then faked that 3 ball and was able to drive in for what was one of the best dunks of the year in college basketball. He really does it all when he's feeling it, and now he's starting to feel it. And when you get that production from guys like Toye, and when you get that production from guys like Willis and the entire bench, this team starts to roll, and it doesn't get that drop-off when you sit LaChance and Roberson for those few minutes.
Right, Mississippi State was one of those really interesting games because they were leading by 8-9 points with 9 minutes left to go, and then all of a sudden it was a tie game. All of a sudden they were down by 1, and it really felt like that Vanderbilt type of game, having a big lead but blowing it late. But then, as you said, Max, you really saw that bench production push them over the edge. But a big thing that I saw was free throws and getting to the line 12 times, and the fact that they were making free throws late in that game, and especially in the Florida game. I think free throws were a really big thing because this is a team that has struggled with free throws, and just getting to the line is indicative of the fact that they're actually driving instead of settling for really bad threes. So I think that whole offensive scheme, being able to actually drive, get to the hoop, and force fouls is really big. And especially in the Florida game when they were shooting 91% from the charity strike, I think that was huge, and I think that's what really put them over the top.
And Vanderbilt collapsing late in games is not a new phenomenon. In fact, my motto historically for Vanderbilt basketball has been making winnable games close since 1893. That's basically what this team has done for years. You can talk to any long-term Vanderbilt fan and they'll tell you that. I mean, for this team that has a group of seniors that has had experience in these close games, haven't won too many of them, but they've been in a lot of these games. You lose one in Matthew Fisher-Davis. When you're rolling out a lot of guys that haven't been in these scenarios as much, does it help to just actually be able to do it for once? Because you saw the way the Mississippi State game went, I think they carried that momentum over into the Florida game somewhat. And earlier in the season, they've won a game here and there after some losing stretches where it's just good to finally get it out of the way. How much does just being able to win one of these games help you out long term, and just having that experience and having the confidence, okay, you've done it, now let's go do it again?
That's big time, and not just for the team, for the individual too, and especially Riley LaChance. You look at that Mississippi State game, he's a guy who's had a couple of chances to bring wins late in games to this team. He missed an open 3 earlier against Middle Tennessee that would have tied the game and sent it to overtime, missed 4 free throws at the end of the game against Kentucky, and he's missed free throws late in games all season, really. So he's a guy that's been able to give it to you for most of the game and has struggled in the last minute, and to make that shot against Mississippi State and to win the game for his team kind of takes the burden off his shoulders and takes kind of the blame off his shoulders as well. And so he's able to say, you know what, I've passed this hurdle, this team can pass this hurdle, and they did, and they came out more free-flowing against Florida, a little bit better in their offense, a little bit smoother. Like you said, they're not settling for those three-point jumpers, and especially late in games, they're not taking bad shots. They're getting to the rim, especially LaChance. You're seeing him drive the ball a lot more. So this team, it feels like they're playing more loose. And even when they were down 11 in the second half against Florida, they're not afraid, and they come back and they constantly fight and they win these games, and they have the crowd to back them up, and that's a large part of it. They've won 5 straight games at home, but it's a huge burden off their back to win that game against Mississippi State in the way that they did, with their leader, Riley LaChance, being the catalyst.
Right, when you're looking specifically at the mentality of the younger guys on the team, getting there, getting to those late game situations, but actually being able to win, it's quite a shift in that mentality from what we've previously seen. But on the flip side of that, we're also really going to see how much we're going to miss Riley LaChance. I mean, looking at that Mississippi State game, that last second three is something that really, really bailed out Vandy in that game. And I think that production from Riley LaChance, especially when he was putting people on skates during the Florida game, like, as the season is going on, we're seeing that mentality being instilled to the younger guys, but we're also just realizing just how much we're going to miss the production of some of the seniors on the team.
You touched on the younger guys, and this is the kind of thing that I feel is a really important aspect of this, is that Vanderbilt, in terms of sports, has not had a winning culture for that long, and some could argue if ever. Next year, for this Vanderbilt team, given the recruits that they've got and given the recruit that they could get in the end in Romeo Langford, this is going to be a team that is going to win games, in theory. They're going to be an elite-level team in college basketball. In order to be able to do that, you need to not just have the talent, but you need to be able to have a winning culture and a winning attitude throughout the entire team. It's not just going to be those guys. There are going to be guys that are playing this year, some younger guys that are going to have the chance to play more next year. So when you see guys like Saban Lee, Ejike Obina, Jerry Baptiste, Joe Toy, these guys that some of them have played for a little while, but just winning these games, I feel like for them, even if it's not going to matter in the end because Vanderbilt's not in all likelihood going to make any sort of postseason tournament, even if it's not going to matter towards that, just knowing that you have the ability to win and being able to have an attitude that you go into a game thinking that you're going to win it, that's the kind of thing that can impact your mindset going into a season in which you have a lot of hype around. You have a lot of really, really elite, talented players that are going to be able to win basketball games. Do you see the impact of this down the road as well with some of these freshmen?
Yeah, I definitely see it, and Saban Lee said after this game against Mississippi State that it's nice to be on the winning side of one. And when you start to lose so many in a row, you feel like you're digging a deeper and deeper hole. And Vanderbilt was able to get out of that hole with a win against Mississippi State, another one against Florida, and these younger guys going into next season realize, hey, maybe we're 11-17 right now, but we can beat anyone on any given night. And they saw that against Florida, one of the perennial top teams in the SEC. I know they're not ranked right now, but they're still a very talented team. When Vanderbilt's able to come out and beat them, they recognize, hey, there's no team that we can't beat. And going into next season, especially with the hype and the talent that Garland and Shitu bring to this team, guys like Lee and guys like Toy and Willis are going to realize that we have to be the guys to step up now. We know these guys can ball, but we're the guys who have been here for 1 year, 2 years now. Toy's a senior next season. So kind of bringing that winning culture, like you said, from this year into next year, because 11-17 is not a great record, and they recognize that. But this team's a lot better than their record is, and their play of late has shown that.
For me, it's not just the winning, but it's the way they're actually getting that winning done. I feel like they're winning in the right type of way. I remember last season we used to say live and die by the three all the time, but last week in these wins we saw that necessarily wasn't the case. I mean, LaChance hit that huge three-pointer that put them over the edge, yes, but that bench production and actually getting to the free throw line is what really put them in position to win that Mississippi State game. And then when you look at Florida, they made twice as many free throws as Florida even attempted. So the fact that they're not selling for those bad threes in those games, they're actually driving the lane, they're actually getting fouled, I think they're winning in the right way. And I think that type of right winning culture is going to be even more impactful for these young guys moving forward.
We talked a lot about the way these last two wins have been related to each other, have some things in common. Now we're going to move on to one thing that every single Commodore win has in common. They've all been within the friendly confines of Memorial Gym. That is right. Vanderbilt, with their loss last night on the road at LSU, has not won a single road game this season. And they only have one left, and that's next week against Ole Miss. But Vanderbilt has yet to win a game on the road. Guys, I mean, that's an astounding number. The fact that they have not won a single road game this season. What gives? What changes between Vanderbilt's home performance and road performance that has allowed this to happen?
Right, it feels like they're taking Memorial Magic a little too seriously with this one. But I think a lot of it has to do with their offensive production, the offensive scheme that they have going forward. And I think that a big reason that they're doing so poorly on the road is bad shots. Because I look at a lot of the problems that they have. They have a lot of turnovers. They have a pretty poor defense when it comes to opponent field goal percentages. And they consistently get out-rebounded. And something that stands out to me as being a common thread throughout that pattern is taking really bad shots. Because especially when you're taking bad shots and your opponents are getting lots of rebounds off of clankers and bricks, they get into their transition offense very quickly. So I think that on the road, they just are settling for worse opportunities and aren't necessarily trying to impose an offensive scheme and actually driving the lane as often as they would like.
I think the problem is when they're on the road, it's on the defensive side of the ball. And I think when you see teams pile up so many buckets in a row, when you're at home, like Mississippi State was able to do that against Vanderbilt at home, making 3 after 3 after 3, the crowd's not really continuing to ignite that and feeding into it. On the road, 3 buckets in a row feels like a disaster. And it happens over and over again with Vanderbilt. Teams have the best opposing three-point percentage against any team in the nation against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt gives up a higher percentage of three-pointers than any other team. And it's not that they're not getting out and contesting a lot. It's just these threes are falling. And we saw it with Xavier Stapleton from Mississippi State, hitting 5 threes in a span of 7 possessions. Teams just shoot the ball well against Vanderbilt. And I think a lot of that is the size on the perimeter, or the lack thereof. When you start 3 guys that are 6'2" or smaller, you don't really have the size on the perimeter to defend the three-point shot. And teams are making threes at an extremely high clip. And so when you come down and you hit 2 threes in a row, that brings the crowd into it and is a huge home court advantage. And we see the converse of that, which is when Vanderbilt's at home and they make 2 threes in a row, this crowd goes crazy. Memorial Magic is really magical, like you said. So it's just when you're at home, the crowd's behind you. When you're not, they're not behind you. But you have to be able to minimize the impact that the crowd has on games. And Vanderbilt hasn't been able to do that by getting stops on a routine basis.
I mean, you look at other sports, and being the home team versus the road team actually does make some sort of tangible difference on the game. In hockey, you have, when you're making line changes, the home team gets the last change. They can get the matchup they want with the players out there on the ice. You have other sports that have some sort of home field advantage tangibly affect the game as well. In baseball, you have last licks if you're the home team. But one thing that the Vanderbilt soccer head coach Darren Ambrose has told me when I've asked him about the way his team plays on the road, he always tells his players it's the same size field, it's the same size goal, it's the same size ball. So there's really no difference in how you should be playing. I mean, in that sense, technically, is there anything that Vanderbilt is doing differently on the road versus at home that you notice that just really makes the difference in these games?
Well, when I'm looking at the numbers, I'm looking at things like turnovers and rebounds. And when you look at something like turnovers, that's definitely Vanderbilt trying to actually impose their will on the game and execute what they want to execute. And when you look at something like rebounds, that's very much an effort and a hustle stat, as well as it is like technically like boxing out and things like that. So from that standpoint, I think it has less to do with what they're actually doing and the mentality that they're playing with on the road. And as you were saying earlier, Max, a lot of it is the psyche that happens on the road in these stadiums.
Yeah, I think you touched on it, rebounding. And Jeff Roberson put up 11 rebounds against Mississippi State. They start 2 guys that are 6'10" or taller in that front court, and he was able to put up 11. The game before that against Auburn, he picks up 3 rebounds. And it's not to say that Roberson isn't going his hardest every time, because we know that's his calling card. He is. But it's the effort that you're putting in, and when you're so energized and the crowd is so behind you and you get one stop after another, you're on a run, there's just no matching that adrenaline and that effort that you're putting in. And Vanderbilt's done it extremely well. For a team that's undersized, they crash the boards very, very well at home. And they don't do that as well on the road. And maybe that is the reason. Maybe subconsciously they don't feel as into the game on the road. I don't know what it is. But the rebounding disparity is there from home on the road, and it's much better at home.
I remember during the Florida game, late down the stretch, Saban Lee had 2 huge defensive rebounds where he came running in from the perimeter, jumping over guys that had 3-4 inches on him. And those are the type of difference-making plays that help them win that game, especially when it's a 1-2 possession game. And those are just the types of plays that you don't see on the road.
You certainly don't have that Memorial magic everywhere, and there's only one place you can find it. That's right here in West End in Nashville. So we'll see if they can bring some of that Memorial magic to Oxford. They take on Ole Miss, try to avoid a streak of sadness, a full losing slate on the road. Finally now, we move to the baseball diamond. We move to the Hawk. Vanderbilt Baseball out to a roaring start to the year, taking 2 of 3 from the Duke Blue Devils and playing their second of 2 games against Presbyterian, the Blue Hose of Presbyterian as we speak. Expected to win that one as well. But really the big story out of these first few games of the year for Vanderbilt has been the play of some of their freshmen. Guys getting into the lineup like Pat DeMarco, Jason Gonzalez. You also have Austin Martin getting in there as well. So these are a lot of guys that are really going to make an impact on the team. What have you been most impressed with some of these freshmen? Not just the guys in the lineup, but also some of the pitchers.
I've been impressed. I mean, when you first step into college baseball, you're seeing a level of pitching that's so elevated from where you came from. And the poise and the ability to take the right pitches and to swing at the right pitches and not try to crush the ball every time you swing. And that's something that I think Pat DeMarco epitomizes. Every time Pat DeMarco comes up, he's taking the right pitches. I have yet to see him swing at a pitch out of the zone. And every time there's a strike, he just cleanly hits it right back up the middle, right where it came from. And that's what you're taught as a hitter. He doesn't do too much, but he's a line drive hitter. And Tim Corbin said, DeMarco's the kind of guy who can be at any point in this lineup because he just hits. And that's what he does so well. He's poised. He looks like he's been there before. 11 hits in his first 4 games as a Commodore, 8 in the first series against a top 25 team in Duke that has a very solid pitching staff. It's really been incredible to watch. And you see it even with guys coming off the bench. Austin Martin didn't start the first 2 games. Then he comes in the leadoff spot, and his first at-bat, he homers. And he's not the kind of guy who's so big who you're going to see all these homers out of. He's not Jason Gonzalez and Julian Infante's size. It's just a smooth, clean swing with great bat speed, and you're not seeing anybody try to hit the ball too hard. And so when you look at these freshmen, I'm really impressed with the poise they've shown and the ability to say that the stage really isn't too big for them, to translate those fundamentals from practice right into the game.
Right. For me, what's most impressive about the freshmen right now is just how many are making such a significant impact. Because I remember last week we were talking about freshmen who we thought were going to be impactful, and we each were talking about 1 or 2, maybe 3. We weren't expecting this many freshmen to be this consistent right off the bat, and that's something that's really remarkable. Because we're talking about the #1 recruiting class, but we really didn't expect to see an actual, real-life impact of this many freshmen across the board, batting and pitching. Because you're looking at Pat DeMarco, who's having a really, really hot start, and even if he cools down, you're looking at someone like Philip Clark, who's been playing from that designated hitter position and was leading the team in RBIs after that series with Duke. So that's very impressive numbers. And then you're looking at pitching, too. Mason Hickman threw 5 scoreless innings in relief, got 7 strikeouts over that stretch. And Hugh Fisher threw a couple of scoreless innings out there, too. So it's just the fact that there are so many different freshmen having such a significant impact already. That's what impresses me the most.
I mean, you look at this lineup top to bottom, there's just so much depth that you could have some really talented players sitting in the bottom half of the lineup just because of how many unbelievably skilled guys there are. But looking at some of the veterans, some of them are not starting too hot. Julian Infante still waiting to get that first hit as of this taping of the show. But when this lineup is ultimately going to be at full strength, when you have those veterans hitting like they're supposed to be, and you have the freshmen stepping up, how dangerous can this team be?
Very, very, very dangerous. I mean, this is the #1 recruiting class in college baseball, and we're seeing the impact just in the first few games. There's still a learning curve, and these guys do figure probably not to hit 6'11" like Pat DeMarco was coming into today, but they do figure to continue to get better and better. And so when you look at that, guys like Jason Gonzalez, someone who has immense power, we haven't seen that yet. We saw it on a foul ball that hit Memorial Gym, but we haven't really seen the power yet. When we start to see these guys come into their own, and then, of course, Julian Infante, a Golden Spikes nominee at the beginning of this year, he's still hitless. When we see these guys start to showcase that power, particularly Infante and Gonzalez, this lineup can be very dangerous. There are no breaks in it. And that's something where you usually get to the bottom of the lineup and you say, okay, these guys I can get out. No, the bottom of the lineup's just as strong as the top for Vanderbilt, and that's what's extremely special about this team. I will say about Infante, even though he hasn't been hitting the ball well, you can tell he's a veteran by the way he approaches these at-bats. He's walked 3 times heading into today. He's been hit by a pitch. He grounded out to third, I think, to drive in a run. He's doing the right things, and he knows his swing's not completely there, but he can still contribute to this lineup in many ways, and that's what you love to see out of a veteran. So when he really gets that stroke back, he's the best hitter in this lineup. And when you don't have your best hitter having a single hit, and you're still hitting the ball and winning games like you are, it poses a very dangerous threat in the future.
Right, that's the key to me, and it makes me almost regret the Tinder swipe that I had last week when I wasn't expecting Vandy in Omaha. But it's something that's really interesting because, first of all, no one's expecting the freshmen to sustain this level of play because no one can sustain this level of play. But even when they level off, and some of our veterans that we were expecting to pick it up do pick it up, this is a team that has been pitching incredibly well, and they've been scoring in volume. So you look at that combination, and it was either scoring well last year or pitching well last year. Never had the combination of the two. You look at that potential this year, and it's really, really exciting, but it's also very dangerous and something that's going to make other teams very worried, especially with all the young talent that we're still tapping into.
The big tests are coming very soon, Maxie. Parting thoughts here.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting to note that we talked a lot about the hitters. Tim Corbin has thrown a freshman pitcher in every single game so far. That makes 5 today when he started Jake Etter. Just something to think about because there was a little bit of concern about this pitching staff headed into the year. The freshmen are getting the job done. Only one of these 5 freshmen has let up a run so far. So important to look at that as well.
Absolutely. It's going to be an ultra-competitive SEC this year. You got a lot of top 25 teams. The biggest tests still yet to come for the Vandy boys. With that, that'll just about do it for this week's episode of VU Sports Wired. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. We will be back next week with our final edition before spring break. For Max Schneider and Drew Sundaram, I'm Cutler Klein saying so long, and we'll see you next time.